Again, with the public's distaste for what Scott Walker wants to do in Wisconsin. The Huffington Post, Howard Fineman joins us. He's an MSNBC political analyst. And Josh Marshall is with Talking Points Memo. Let's take a look at these the polling that's coming out. A new poll by PPS, we call it Public Policy Polling, asked Wisconsin voters if they could vote again, would they vote for Governor Scott Walker or his opponent, the guy who beat Tom Barrett? Well, just 45% right now would vote for the governor again. 52% would vote for the guy they voted against last time. In November, by the way, Walker won with 52 against 47 for his opponent. Well, that's a big swing in about just 4 months. PPP, by the way, is a Democratic robo-poll, as I said, which some pollsters say isn't quite as accurate as some of the word-of-mouth polls. Well, let's go to this. Just assuming that's roughly accurate, Howard, this guy's not doing well with his union bashing.
Well, I think what the internals of that poll and other polls show, Chris, is that independents and even some Republicans who were supporting Walker, I think, are abandoning him and are looking at this fight between what looks like union busting and deficit cutting and having second thoughts. And I think this is the new generation of Reagan Democrats. Remember, union members, when Ronald Reagan appealed to those union members, now their sons and daughters are sort of moderate Republican types, but they don't want the union bashing necessarily.
You know, despite the fact some people on the left like to argue, and I don't think they're ever thinking it through, Josh, most Republicans are not rich people. They may serve the interests and their voting patterns of rich people. They may inadvertently vote for trickle-down economics, but most Republicans are cloth-cut Republicans. My parents were cloth-cut Republicans. I know exactly all about it. They're regular middle-class people. I don't think they're union bashers, and that, of course, is the question here. Is Howard right? Did they venture in the last election into grabbing those middle-of-the-road Reagan Democrats to vote for them, and now realize those people, I should say those people now realize they didn't vote for this crowd in this point of view?
That's exactly right. It's a classic case of overreach. And I think, you know, what happened early on in this struggle was, you know, the unions pretty quickly came back to Walker and said, fine, on the cuts, on the, you know, bigger contributions to our pensions and health care and so forth, we'll do all of that. And they focused on the issue of collective bargaining. And people around this country, I think, get, you know, unions are kind of like democracy, you know, has all sorts of problems to it, maybe the worst system in the world, except all the alternatives. And I think that abroad, you know, a lot of people in this country may think that this union's got too big a deal or this guy has to be changed. But when it comes down to basically getting rid of unions entirely, I think a broad majority of the country gets that if there were no unions, which is what getting rid of collective bargaining would mean, it would really mean no unions, that would definitely be worse than what we have now. So he's kind of awakened, I think, a pretty big majority in the country, and the polls are bearing that out, that people know it's not progress to get rid of unions.
Let's take a look at the New York Times poll. Just came out, a CBS poll as well. It shows 60% of Americans now oppose efforts, obviously by this governor, to weaken collective bargaining. Only 33 support it. Again, you know, labor needed a little, what did you call it, electroshock? It looks like they're getting it. You know, Howard's with me here, and I have to tell you, the unions, you know, when look at some of these polls, it's kind of scary. The number that jumped out at me when they asked people, do you think people should have a right to collectively bargain, to unions? Which means the basic notion that you get together and you fight the boss and try to get a raise or better working conditions or air conditioning put into a plant or whatever. 20% say they haven't heard enough about unions. There are more people in this country now who say to pollsters, I don't know anything about unions to have an opinion, than there are members of unions.
Yeah.
7% of the workforce are unions. 20% of the people are saying, I don't know nothing about these. What are unions? Isn't that an incredible statement?
Well, as Josh was saying, I think that if the unions are lucky, the sort of vestigial memory that we have of the basic American bargain about unions. So we had this argument in America about 70 or 80, 70 years ago.
Back in the Pinkertons.
Yeah, about whether this was interference with individual contract to create a collective union. And we decided that, yes, you could have a collective union that would override the idea of individual contract between the owner and the employer. We had that huge argument.
And the Wagner Act.
And yes, and it got violent. at times. And I still think there's a memory the American people have that this is somehow necessary as part of our democratic bargain between power and the people. And so the younger union people that I talk to are delighted to have this opportunity to try to educate people, even though they have to educate them on behalf of public employee unions, which aren't always the most popular.
You know, it's interesting. The Netroots really came into their real power. They didn't win, but they made a big argument for the public option with regard to health care, Josh. We were all part of that discussion. It was more than a discussion. It was a passionate cause. And now it seems to me what might be happening here is a merging of interests and identities between the Netroots, people who really are younger, I would argue, younger and perhaps more educated than most people, who use computers, laptops to communicate, the internet. They know how to get around in terms of modern communication. And now saying, well, wait a minute, I think we're on the side of labor here. And they may not have thought much about it before. And now they say, you know, the right to organize collectively may not be something that's affected my life yet, but I'm with these people.
Well, you know, I think, you know, the Netroot stars, for lack of a better word, Coase and a lot of other people, they've thought a lot about unions. They've been, you know, down with this program for a long time. But I do think you're right that there and that 20 or 20-odd percent number that you said of kind of like, I haven't heard enough. I mean, you know, most people think, wow, I've heard, you know, whether you like them or not, you've heard plenty about unions. And I think that's a real opportunity for the labor movement in this country, that there's that many people. I mean, I think that there was another like 15% that were undecided and then hadn't heard enough. So yeah, I think that is a really good point. And going back to the earlier issue we were discussing, what Walker's saying is that, you know, we just can't afford collective bargaining at all. And I think that a lot of people have a basic sense of fair play, that if the taxpayers vis-a-vis the public employees unions are represented by the government, maybe I as a taxpayer want the government to drive a bit of a harder bargain. But the idea that the public employees don't even get to negotiate, I think that offends a lot of people's just basic sense of fair play.
Well, there's a new ad that's been put out by the Republican Governors Association. They apparently made a pretty good, strong buy out in Wisconsin. They're airing it right now. Let's look at how the Republicans' National Governors Association, they were meeting here in Washington, what they think they have as a case. To hear the other argument, let's put it on. Here's the Republican argument for Wisconsin. Let's listen.
It's a sea of red ink in Madison. And while Senate Democrats are fleeing their responsibility, Governor Walker is leading, balancing the budget without raising taxes. So Wisconsin will be open for business again, and asking state employees to contribute to their own benefits, just like everyone else.
Well, there you go, Howard. Skipped the issue of union organization, didn't they?
Yes.
They never brought that in.
Right.
That's the tell right there.
And if that's what the conversation was, none of this would be going on. You wouldn't have the people sitting in the state capitol. It's the fact that the governor went the other step, and it's a classic defense ad here because they're revealing the weakness that they know they have.
Exactly, and let's clarify our role here as public educators, Josh. The unions gave on these givebacks right in the beginning. They said, yes, we'll agree to a copay on health benefits. Yes, we'll agree to a copay on pension benefits. They rolled on that very quickly, way before this ad was produced. So this ad is really deceptive. It's saying there's an issue at hand here that's already been resolved.
I think that's exactly right. You know, they see that the Republicans, Walker, et cetera, sees that collective bargaining argument, which is really what's being discussed right now, is a loser for them. And when you have these poll numbers that are 60-30, you know, those are lethal for anybody in politics.
Lethal?
So
Did you say lethal? Because let me tell you who's using the word lethal. You know how we all agreed in the media world, I think we all agreed a couple weeks ago after the horror in Arizona, that we weren't going to talk about, you know, shoot them up. We weren't going to use terms, ballistic terms in the way we talk. We're not going to say mow down our opponents or all that. We're going to stop talking about guns and regular political discourse.
I don't think that.
Somebody didn't get the message.
I don't think that's in the same category. I think those kind of numbers can be politically lethal.
Well, I'm just teasing. I used you to tease into Boehner.
You got the way of his setup, Josh.
You were part of my setup, sir. Let's take a look. Here is John Boehner, who didn't get the. You, of course, have always got the message. Here's John Boehner on unions, and let's look at his metaphor. Let's listen.
In some of these states, you've got collective bargaining laws that are so weighted in favor of the public employees that there's almost no bargaining. You know, we've given them a machine gun, put right at the heads of the local officials, and they really have had their hands tied.
What is this, Glenn Beck talk guns at the heads of? That's how Glenn talks. I'm going to put a gun to your head and all this.
Well, when John Boehner backslides, he really backslides.
I mean, he's the guy that's
what amazes me about this whole thing is, Chris, it's probably been a half a century or more before the issue of collective bargaining and since the issue of collective bargaining unions was front and center.
Big labor.
Big labor in a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Or you could maybe argue in '84 with Reagan and Mondale, but not really. Nobody took that seriously. But to go at the guts of the question of collective bargaining and turn it into a presidential election issue, which the Republicans seem determined to do, because Karl Rove just said American Crossroads is going to put raise $120 million in the name of fighting the unions.
Yeah, but that's sort of like LaRouche always runs at the latest thing that works.
I have not seen anything out of a guy like Karl Rove attempting to wave the bloody shirt of the unions in decades. It's always,
he's looking for something hot.
It's been abortion, or it's been the Panama Canal going back a generation, or it's been spending, it's been something else. I haven't heard the unions used in that way.
Well, if you want to know the flavor of the week, go to Karl Rove.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Howard Fineman. Thank you, Josh.